In 2005, photographer Peter Menzel's photos of what families eat around the world went mega viral. They were fantastic and fascinating. The impression I got is the people in poorer countries were still eating real food: beans, rice, veggies, fruit, maybe a little meat and fish. But when the packaged and convenience foods arrived, mainly from big corporations, it was as if Tropical Storm Sugar had landed. Peter teamed with a fascinating writer, Faith DeLucio, also his wife, and they wrote this amazing book. I can't even imagine how much work went behind that. The behind-the-scenes photos in the book really show how emotional food is, how tied it is to our culture. The photos also show the genius marketing of companies like Kentucky Fried Chicken. This is what the Colonel looks like in Tokyo. In 2019, 14 years later, another photographer, Gregg Segal, followed up by taking photos of what kids eat around the world. And a few moms were surprised by what they saw there and said, "Oh, Dad lets them do it." After admiring all these wonderful photos, I wanted to make photos of keto, vegan, and Mediterranean diets. So let's go to the store and buy some keto and vegan food to photograph. If my friends see me buying something crazy at the store, they're going to think I lost my mind during the long quarantine. Some keto, a little bit of vegan, and some dad treats. So let's organize my haul with refined and fast foods in the center, since they represent the majority of calories in America right now. They're the ones engineered to be so yummy that resistance is futile, especially for kids. We'll put everything else on the perimeter, just like they're arranged in most grocery stores. The fruit and veggie sections may look big, but they only represent 10% of calories consumed in America. This represents what Americans could choose to eat, except where fresh fruit and veggies are scarce. We live around farmers markets, but we still buy frozen fruits and veggies. The trouble is, refined foods blew up our scales. It wasn't hard to see why. No one thinks refined foods help you lose weight or get healthy, so every health-oriented diet removed the biggest offender, processed foods. I say health-oriented because many vegans change their diet for the planet and the animals, and the spread of infectious diseases. Great causes, but if they don't do it for the health, it can mean cupcakes. Undeniably delicious, but ow, the scale. Okay, so we know food is insanely over-the-top emotional, and no one wants to give up their yummies. Almost everyone who manages to break up with junk food makes huge strides with their health and their weight, especially as they age. So keto, Mediterranean, and whole plants all have inspiring success stories of better health and skinnier bodies. But what does the science say about which one has the healthiest people who live the longest and keep the weight off the best? The meals you'd eat on keto are dramatically different from whole plant meals. Let's start with the Mediterranean diet first because it's the easiest to stick to and it gracefully sidesteps most of the social media diet wars. It's heavy on fresh produce, beans, whole grains, fruits, nuts, and fish, light on meat and dairy, with a dash of moderation for Italian joy. Gelato. When I was a teen, I got to caddy many times for Jack LaLanne, who was a very famous TV star for his exercise show that ran for 34 years. And this is what he looked like on his 40th birthday. Jack was the Arnold Schwarzenegger of his day, and he was super athletic, too. The things he could do on Muscle Beach just blew my mind, and I felt like I was caddying for Superman. It's crazy to think that I felt sorry for myself caddying for Jack, because at the Halfway Cafe, he would only buy me raisins or peanuts. All the other golfers would buy their caddies Butterfinger bars. Butterfingers. Just kidding. My taste buds have changed, and now cherries are my fave. Jack famously wouldn't eat anything man-made, and by the time I knew him, he wouldn't eat anything from a cow or a pig.
A lot of people say, I'm fat because my dad is fat. You're fat because you ate all that junk that your dad was eating to make him fat.
Jack recommended 10 vegetables and 5 fruits every day. I thought of him as the poster boy for what later became known as the Mediterranean diet 20 years after he promoted it so publicly. My father, however, was fond of the Atkins diet and loaded up on steak and eggs, which he thought were the healthiest foods. And just like that, I was caught in the middle of a diet war. I was gobsmacked when Jack swam across a bay at age 70, handcuffed and shackled and towing 70 boats with 70 people in them. What? How is that even possible? Sadly, my father died of a fatal heart attack at 70 after suffering high blood pressure and gout for 20 years. Jack got 26 more alive years and 46 more healthy years than my dad. Those are anecdotes, not science, but they certainly gave me a lifetime of interest in the science of health. I got a huge smile when Jack published this book to celebrate his 90th birthday. He looked great, standing straight and vigorous, surrounded by the fruits and vegetables he loves so much. And for his 95th birthday, he was planning to swim from Catalina Island to Los Angeles, and he would have done it, except his wife, LaLanne, who's probably the wiser of the two, said, "Enough, Jack, that's enough." Now to plunge into a serious food fight, which is to ask which one helps you lose the most weight, which is easiest to stick to, which gives you the best long-term health. If you were to ask U.S. News & World Report, who assembled an expert panel of 30 scientists, the Mediterranean diet was number one because it's considered the easiest to stick to. Keto was last among all diets because of its low rate of adherence and its health concerns. But hold on, doesn't keto have fanatical supporters and very inspiring success stories? It does. None more inspiring to me than Mark Sisson, who at 60 plus looks amazing. Mark is a former elite triathlete and still works out. He inspired me to do micro workouts during the day. My background is science, so I tend to see the world through that lens. There's a perception that nutritional science is complicated and unsettled, but it's actually pretty simple. And there are some important things that are just as clear as a bell after a century of pretty good science. It's just that food companies have giant profit motives to discredit the science, and we as humans are dying to believe that the foods we love burn the fat. Butter! So here's a tale of two books to help tell the story. The first one looks like it could be intimidating. It's called The Telomere Effect, and it's by a Nobel Prize-winning scientist, Elizabeth Blackburn. The second is The Keto Reset Diet by blogger and athlete Mark Sisson. Telomeres are like the end caps on your shoelaces to protect them from looking like they do on your old disgusting sneakers. Except that telomeres are the end caps on your strands of DNA. The telomere book is based on a very simple premise, and that is the length of your telomeres is a good indicator of your cellular age. So we can expose modern humans to stress, lack of sleep, various different foods, we can have control groups, and do a simple blood test and see what the results are. Strong science. If you do those tests, you find out some good news and bad depending on what your current taste buds are like. Red and processed meat, saturated fat, sweetened drinks, vegetable oils, and white bread are all associated with shortened telomeres. That's bad. But fiber, vegetables, nuts, beans, fruit, whole grains, green tea, and omega-3 rich fish are associated with longer ones. My reading of her book is her science points to a very whole plants rich Mediterranean diet with some omega-3 rich fish. Aside from the word telomeres, there are no confusing scientific terms, and it's really a great read. The premise of keto, as Mark Sisson describes it, is we should eat what our hunter-gatherer ancestors evolved to eat, which is a lot of fat. The thing is, you have to accept the idea that our hunter-gatherer ancestors evolved into fat-burning machines from their primarily plant-eating primate cousins. And you have to get past the idea that the world's leading paleontologists say it's a myth. Does it really matter, though, if it works for modern humans with modern foods? I'm in. Sadly, I found the book really hard to read because it's filled with technical terms. I had to take notes. Ketoacidosis, LP2A, autophagy, cortisol glycation, gluconeogenesis, mycovilli, lectins. I could go on and on. Those are just in the opening chapters. And we've studied vitamin A and vitamin D pretty carefully for a long time, and we only know so much about them. And here's a flood of chemicals we just don't know that much about. The thought struck me as I was reading it that it's sort of like trying to understand the labels on supplements. So on a hunch, I Googled telomere supplements, and the third listing to come up was OptiAge. It has vitamin D to help extend your telomeres. Well, I didn't know until then that Mark Sisson owns a supplements company that manufactures OptiAge that he sold recently to Kraft Foods for $200 million. Okay, so maybe I got the wrong book. Let's try this one. It's a New York Times bestseller from Nina Teicholz. She has journalism degrees from Stanford and Oxford. She's written for the New York Times, the Atlantic Magazine. Nina's not a scientist, but other journalists have written very credible books, like Michael Pollan, who wrote at least 3 of them, and John Robbins. I read 2 of his books. Both of them have been fabulous. Nina has a spectacular story. A journalist overturns a whole century of science, and the way we got it wrong was backroom politics and big personalities. And actually, we get to eat the foods that we love. I mean, that story would make the cover of every magazine, right? But what about her central idea that saturated fat is not harmful and science simply got that wrong? We'd all love to believe that. I attended a lecture by David Marin in 2015. He's the head of preventative cardiology at Stanford. He showed fascinating images of monkey arteries after the monkeys had been fed diets that clogged their arteries. Top row. The second row shows how the monkey arteries opened back up after the monkeys were returned to their normal monkey chow diet. By the way, you can buy monkey chow on Amazon. Someone from the audience asked, what did they feed those monkeys to get their arteries to clog like that? Professor Marin responded casually, probably coconut oil. And you could feel the audience gasp. Someone said, but wait, isn't coconut oil healthy? And Professor Marin said, I don't know how it got to be a health craze after we used it for decades to give animals heart disease. What? Me being me, I had to get my hands on that paper, and it turns out it was a whole series of papers dating back to 1909. Who knew? And they referenced a highly academic book that I could get for $100. And here it is, with a very technical title, Hypolipidemic Agents, with an entire chapter devoted to how to clog the arteries of animals. They've done it for more than a century to pigeons and chickens and hamsters and mice and rabbits and dogs and pigs and every form of primate. Now I know some of you watching are rushing to Amazon to see if you can get a copy of this fascinating book before it sells out. Well, I hate to piss you off, but I have a couple of spoilers. Spoiler number one is any saturated fat will do. Butter, lard, egg yolks. But coconut oil is cheap and it only takes 14% of calories to pretty much clog the arteries of any animal. Spoiler number two, it's expensive to maintain a lab full of monkeys, so they found a way to supercharge the clogging. Just add sugar. The combination of the two makes a much more potent cocktail than either one by themselves. And that explains a lot. So now you know when you see two people arguing, it's the sugar, no, it's the saturated fat. Now you know the answer is yes. And it helps us understand those studies you see quoted a lot where test subjects are asked to reduce their intake of saturated fat. And in America, that means replacing those calories with sugar-sweetened foods. In those studies, blood fats of the test subjects may not have reduced, but they do in the monkeys because the monkeys don't go back to eating sugary sweetened foods. I know what you're thinking right now. We're not monkeys. Didn't we evolve to eat meat? Given the harm the researchers saw in the animals, it wouldn't be ethical to test humans in the same way. However, we give saturated fat to ourselves and our children, so what can we learn from that? Here's Bob Harper, the famously ripped trainer I admire from Biggest Loser.
Okay. And then we're going to do like a tablespoon of coconut oil.
Ugh.
Can you talk?
This better work on my butt, or I'm going to be really creeped out that I had to eat a whole tablespoon of cold oil.
You're going for clarified butter.
Sadly, Bob had a massive heart attack at age 51. He was lucky to survive, which I don't think would have surprised the scientists who gave coconut oil and butter to their pigs and monkeys and watched some of them die of heart attacks. Bob was on the paleo diet, and he has a predisposition to heart disease like I do. His mom died at age 70 of a fatal heart attack, as did my dad. Bob went on to consult with scientist Dean Ornish, who became famous for showing that human arteries open back up, just like monkey arteries, once you place those humans on a good diet. And Bob went on to publish a book called Super Carbs, where he clarifies that refined carbs are garbage. And chapter 1 of his book is Carbs Don't Make You Fat. You can call one of the many prevention centers across the country, and they'll put you on a diet of beans and whole grains and fruits and vegetables, and they have a very high success rate of reversing heart disease. The thing I took away from Dr. Marin's talk at Stanford is when consumers became aware of how bad saturated fat could be in the 80s, we eliminated all fats and replaced that with sugar and white flour, and that didn't work. And what I took away from Nina's book is there's a lot of misinformation and mocking of scientists to make a sensational story. Oof. Heart disease was rare before the 1920s? Oh, please. Otzi the Iceman lived 5,300 years ago and he had very serious heart disease. 600-year-old mummies from the Inuit of Greenland show advanced heart disease. So, Chris, it sounds like you really hate keto. Actually, anybody who gets off refined food and loses weight on keto gets a high five from me. Also, I've seen some very encouraging data about the plant-based form of keto where you're getting your fats from sources like avocados and nuts and seeds. Also, the trend of Keto 2.0, which allows more grams of unrefined carbohydrates, such as from beans and whole grains, that sounds like it follows the science. So, big question, who loses the most weight, the whole plant vegans or the keto dieters? Well, ironically, to me that was a big fat surprise. There is a very respected study that began in 2002 of 73,000 Seventh-day Adventists. Their teachings encourage them to eat as little meat as possible, but their circumstances vary, so some eat only plants, some are various forms of vegetarians, and some eat a little bit of meat. This is a chart of their body mass indexes, and you can see the vegans to the left are the lightest, and the ones who eat a little bit of meat are the heaviest. I would have expected the keto dieters, who probably eat more meat, to follow the trend to the right and be even a little heavier. We don't have a lot of data on keto dieters, but given the stories we hear from the dieters and also from doctors who oversee them, I'm going to call it a draw. Does that surprise you? I think everyone agrees that a big factor in the success of both is the elimination of processed foods. In addition to that, with keto, there seems to be some appetite suppressant that comes from going in ketosis. And in the case of vegans, they eat so much fiber they get to fill up without consuming too many calories. And the other giant question, who's healthiest and who feels the best? Well, you get to lose weight on both and you get to control your blood sugar on both. But the science is pretty clear, the vegans win this one. So Chris, really, isn't nutrition science inconclusive and contradictory? No, it checks out. And here's 2 strong scientific books to keep you off the street and out of trouble for a long time. You can probably read them fairly fast. But for me, it took weeks per book because I had to deep end in all the references. I couldn't help myself. And yes, there are a few bloggers on the internet that lose their minds over these books. Welcome to the internet. I'll end with an astonishing story. Suppose you lived in a diet-obsessed rich country and you could get funded to travel the world in search of the world's healthiest people. You could go study the Maasai warriors in Africa. And suppose your country was filled with distinguished scientists and doctors and journalists and entrepreneurs who invented thousands of diets and hundreds of therapies, only to find out after a century of work that you've been owned by a woman who in 1863 wrote a very simple health code that gained millions of followers hidden in plain sight right here in the United States, who crush every other diet in terms of wellness and longevity. Ah, but that was Ellen White, you say, co-founder of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. She could influence her spiritual followers to be vegetarian. Yes, that could be true, but she got a heck of an assist from John Harvey Kellogg, inventor of cornflakes. He created them to make eating a plant-based breakfast convenient before the age of sugarization of cereals, which horrified him. Kellogg was a Seventh-day Adventist and a famous medical doctor who fully embraced Ellen White's health code. So he developed lots of plant-based foods like soy milk, and he patented peanut butter. He took over an Adventist health spa retreat and turned it into a mega facility that attracted celebs like Tarzan and Amelia Earhart and presidents of the United States. You know those high-tech plant-based meat alternatives that are becoming so popular, invented by genius biochemists? Yes, the Seventh-day Adventists invented them back in the 1800s. You can buy them on Amazon. Surprisingly good. Oh, come on, Chris. You told the story of Jack LaLanne and how he figured it out and influenced millions of people and lived a long time and even got a Hollywood star. Yes, but his mother was a Seventh-day Adventist who took him as a teen to a lecture on the health benefits of whole plant foods, and that changed his life. And this is where the story gets even weirder. Also in 1863, an undertaker by the name of William Banting published a little booklet called Letter on Corpulence, addressed to the public. Banting had lost 35 pounds in a year after his doctor told him to skip the bread and the sugar. And that established Banting as the father of low-carbohydrate diets, a man so famous in South Africa right now, his name is a verb. Are you Banting? And that set up an epic century-and-a-half battle which feels like it must have been made for pro wrestling TV. The Undertaker, representing Team Carnivore, versus the Evangelist, representing Team Vegetarian. But the Drug Lord, representing Team Food Company, is the undisputed champion of the world because he has sugar. Almost a half century after her original writings, Ellen wrote a book on diet. I wondered how much had changed, and the answer was not much. Eat fruits, veggies, grains, beans, and nuts, cooked in as little grease as possible, as close to their natural state as possible. It was very fascinating to hear how diet controversies raged back then. Is milk healthy? Are fish too contaminated from polluted oceans? Are farmed animals beginning to spread more and more disease? I think the most important thing science has revealed in the centuries since she wrote that book is that foods that contain fiber help us avoid our most feared diseases. It's a carbohydrate. It needs its own episode. This is my first episode in this new channel, and if you want to see more, please let me know by liking and commenting. I've been thinking about one on the tricks that the food companies play. That's some drama. And if you heard a dog licking, that's Bodhi. Thank you so much for watching.